Hey, how's it going? Welcome to my Honkai Star Rail tier list. So, I played the closed beta relatively extensively overall, and I've also talked to a lot of people that have played the beta, and also looked into some of the information behind the scenes, gameplay in China, etc. And overall, I'd say this tier list is relatively correct. I did the best that I could with it. I also worked over with some of the boys over at Pridwin website for Honkai Star Rail. And overall, I think most of this information is pretty correct. So before we get into it, let me just say there's a couple of terms that I might use, such as nihility and erudition. Nihility is basically just dot damage, and erudition is pretty much just AoE damage. So I broke my tier list into three main components. There's bossing, which is single target enemy DPS. There's area, which is just clearing trash mobs, or sometimes the ads that bosses will spawn, or just fast farming, the different things in nodes. And the third one is simulated universe, which is a roguelike game mode that they have in the game. The two main end games I would say that I've experienced are basically they have an abyss mode, kind of like Genshin. What's it called again? Like Forgotten Hallway or something like that? I actually forgot. But it's basically Genshin Abyss. And Simulated Universe, which is a little roguelike game mode where every time you win battles, you get like blessings and stuff, and they can really shape your team really differently and make you insanely powerful in certain areas. But it is actually an important thing to do weekly, and it also is a great way to farm some really specific gear in the game, so it's very important. Overall, this game, I would say, is very free-to-play friendly, with most of the free characters being actually relatively strong. A lot of the 4 stars are actually very good, and the starting character, the 5-star main character, is also pretty good. But let's just get right into it with all of the free 4 stars at the beginning. So first, let's start with March 7th. March 7th is, let's be real, she's basically an alternate reality Paimon in this game, but a bit less annoying. Way more palatable of a character. She's the second character that you get in the game, and overall fairly strong for being a free character. She's able to provoke enemies, not on her, but on the target of your choice, where she puts a shield on them, and then the enemies are more likely to attack them. And also something in this game, supposedly, is every character has like a taunt value, so some characters are more likely to be attacked than others. So if you use her taunt skill on a character that already has a higher taunt value than some others, then it will make it so they're even more likely to be hit. So for instance, a character like Gepard actually has a very, very high like taunt number. At least this is what I have heard, that every character has these different numbers associated with them. The shield actually is relatively strong, and she is a defense scaling character, so she's pretty bulky. But what's really cool also is anyone who attacks one of the shielded targets will then be countered by her, and she also has chance to freeze in her attacks, so she can really lock down some of these enemies, which I think is very powerful overall. Next character, Dan Hung, or Don Hung I believe it said. For some reason he has 2 zippers on the front of his shirt, but other than that, Dan is a pretty strong character overall. He's one of the few wind element characters in the game, and a wind single target character is pretty powerful. He also has a slow built into his skill set, which is really good, because how this game works is all the characters are pretty much, the easiest way to picture it is they're pretty much running a mile. And so if you slow the enemy, they're going to get to that finish line slower, so you're just going to be getting more turns than them. That's overall really useful. He also does a lot of single target damage just overall, being a hunt character. Hunt characters generally are for more bossing, big single target DPS. That kind of thing, right? So he's very strong versus bosses, and so him, March, and the main character overall make a pretty useful team at the beginning of the game. Next is Asta. So Asta was mega nerfed from the previous beta, I believe. But she still has some pretty useful utility. She increases the damage of the team after using her skill. She gives these like stacks to herself that increases everybody else's damage, which is good. And her overall team buffing is really nice. And then her ult actually gives a speed buff to the team, so your team's just going to be taking more turns overall, which is incredibly useful. And even if the opponent isn't weak to fire, she's still able to do some decent support for the team. Now, her ability also randomly attacks, which isn't actually that amazing AoE, but if there's only one enemy and all of the hits just attack them, it actually can break toughness of enemies relatively quickly, which is pretty good. Next we have Herta. This character is the one that made me realize that the characters in Honkai Star Rail don't have very many voice lines. I mean, only one ult line? Oh my god, I've heard her so many times. Herta's incredibly good early game, I felt. And especially when the enemies are weak to ice. But overall, as I went on in the game, she just felt weaker and weaker, and if the enemy wasn't weak to ice, she just felt completely useless. One of the big problems with her is she can't actually freeze enemies, and other ice units usually can. So I think that really hurts her a lot. Now, you can do some cool gimmicks where you put one enemy's health bar to 50% health and she activates her passive, then you put another one, she activates her passive, and then you can kind of like chain this stuff and it can be really good. But overall, she's not amazing. One nice thing, though, is you do get a bunch of free copies for her from the simulated universe. So she does get a little bit stronger from those, which is kind of nice. Next, we have Serval. I don't know what's up with these anime characters that fight with guitars, but we got a lot of them now, and I kind of like Serval's design. Serval's another erudition AoE character, so she's just mostly for area clear and not really much single target. And she is a decent lightning character at that, but after I was using her for a little bit, I found her relatively lacking overall. Yeah, she's fine at breaking toughness, but her damage really wasn't anything super special, and the lightning damage over time thing she puts on enemies also really wasn't that strong either, so I was a little bit disappointed by her overall. But hey, there's only so many characters in the game at the moment, and there's not many AoE lightning characters other than the other one's a 5-star, I believe, so she definitely has her place in the game. Next is Natasha. Natasha is the only, like, let's be real, come on, look at her. It's one of the only 2 healers in the game, which instantly makes this character insanely strong in most fights. Shields are often not enough in the game. You can only shield your team so much before they're actually going to be taking some damage. And overall, she actually heals quite a bit, and seeing as there's only 2 healers in the game, well, she's kind of a necessity. Thank God they give her free, right? She's also able to cleanse, which is really good. There's some very key moments I found, especially in Simulated Universe, where if you didn't have a cleanse, you would just get completely steamrolled. So I think that's actually very powerful. Certain bosses such as, well, maybe I won't spoil, can put on some very annoying debuffs, and she's incredibly good at it. There's not much more to say. You need a healer in the game, and she's the healer, and she's free, so there you go. As for this next character, this girl's name is... but as I like to say, Mahjong Girl. One of the 2 quantum characters on release. And overall, I would say she's not all that good. She has decent area damage, but her overall damage output is not amazing, and she's also really greedy with the skill points that your characters use, which is kind of a huge detriment. The only upside she really has is that there's only 2 quantum characters and the other one's a limited 5-star. But even with that, I think you can get by not using the quantum element for most stuff and kind of ignoring that and just not really using her. I would say as a whole, she just feels incredibly weak, and I guess I overall don't really recommend her. It's a shame because I actually really wanted her to work. I think she's very fun too, but I think she needs some sort of buff before release, honestly. I hope they do something for her. But she is the final free 4-star that you do get. Now let's start talking about the rest of the 4-star characters that you can possibly roll for. So first one, Arlan. He's got white hair, one eye covered, a gauntlet on one hand. He's my OC from high school right there. Arlan is a DPS that uses his own HP to deal damage, which sometimes can be a little bit awkward, but he's not only a free character, but he's also actually fairly strong endgame. Once you start to have a real team set up and like some supports and everything like that and some actual gear, he actually can do a lot of damage, but at the beginning, he feels relatively underwhelming overall. Especially with the health loss mechanic can make it a little difficult when you're kind of struggling early on. And I also believe he doesn't use skill points when he uses his skill. He only uses the health as the activator. I actually don't remember 100%, but I believe that's how he works. But he actually is a huge damage dealer, and he is a lightning character with a little bit of AoE on his ultimate, I believe. But overall, really solid character. Just wish I was a little bit more of a fan of his design. Pela is the next character. She's the token glasses girl of the game, and she's a support debuffer, which is an interesting niche in the game. Not many characters do that. She's the only character I know of that decreases the defense of enemies, well, other than Silver Wolf, a character I'll talk about later, who's not even in the game as far as I know yet. But I'm not entirely sure how strong Pela really is, because overall it's better to buff your team than debuff the opponent, because you need to actually have increased chance on gear to debuff to be able to really land these reliably. So that makes it kind of awkward, and I feel like, oh, you may as well just buff your team up then instead. Now, something nice she also has is she's able to strip a buff off of the opponent, which I think is really good, but an issue I found is a lot of bosses that have really powerful buffs, I would use that, and then I would be like, why do they still have the buff? And I would check and it says this buff can't be removed. And I would say like, well, what's the point of this then? I don't really understand. But overall, you kind of want to use her when the opponent is weak to ice. If they aren't, hey, she still has some utility, being able to break their defense a little bit and strip some buffs. That's actually really nice. I think that's overall decent character. Next character, Sampo. Oh boy, Sampo has no money. He got no women. However, he does have nothing. He has nothing. Nah, I'm just kidding. Sampo's actually pretty good. I don't really like his character, and he's so annoying. He's such a clown. But he's actually one of the better 4-stars for single target DPS, I would say, bossing ability. He's especially really good for damage over time. He is an nihility character, and in some situations, he can stack on a ton of wind shear stacks, which is actually really good. So he bounces his dagger. So in AoE, you know, he'll be able to break some toughness of enemies, but if there's only one enemy and his dagger just keeps bouncing on them, not only does it break their toughness incredibly fast, but you can just stack that wind shear damage, which is pretty huge. He can just obliterate the toughness, which is really good. In a place like Simulated Universe, where you can go a full nihility build as well, just all damage over time, you will also just completely destroy some bosses sometimes if you get the right setup, which can be actually incredibly fun. Next character, Hook. You didn't think I was actually going to make a joke out of this adorable kid, did you? I love this character. She was so fun in the story, actually. You make me sick. Hook is the only single target fire damage dealer at the beginning of this game. And she also has a little bit of AoE and a little bit of damage over time, but I would say overall she's not really that powerful. The main thing that she's strong in is just being the only single target fire damage dealer. That's really it. I even got some extra copies of her, so I got some like extra abilities in her eidolons, and I wasn't super impressed by them overall. I kind of wish that she had a little more damage or something going on, because she's very simple, and overall, unless you're fighting a fire weak enemy and you really need someone like her, I don't think she's super amazing. Let's talk about Sushang here. Wait a second, this character looks a little bit familiar, except she is a chicken. Sushang ended up being one of the most insane single-target damage dealers throughout my closed beta experience. She's a 4-star, but she was directly competing with my main 5-star damage dealer, which was really good, and she was out-damaging almost all the other characters that I was really trying. She has a bit of RNG involved in her skill, where sometimes it'll hit extra times, but if the opponent's toughness is broken, it'll always hit those extra times, so she does huge damage when their toughness is broken. And also she has a really cool combo where her ultimate gives her the next turn, pretty much. It gives her 100% of the bar. So you're able to use her skill, then ult, then use her skill again. And not only can that break toughness a bunch or just do insane amounts of damage when their toughness is broken, but you're able to just kind of nuke things really easily on her. And she's just overall one of the best 4-stars, I think, in the game for me. Next is Tingyun, the token fox girl of every anime game. We always gotta get one of those, right? Otherwise, it's not a true fantasy game. Tingyun is one of the most powerful supports in the game, being able to massively increase their damage and giving them ult charge. She even adds a little bit of, I believe, electric damage to that member of the team, so if the enemy is weak to it, you're actually going to lightly break their toughness using that as well, which I think is really cool. It's always better to buff your team than debuff the enemy, and hey, she's one of the best characters at that. Overall, I think in the end game, a lot of people are going to be running 1 DPS, like 2 support, or like at least 1 supporting that character with damage or something, and then maybe like a healer and a shielder, or maybe instead of the shield, just another damage buffer or something like that. And she's definitely going to be one of those characters you're going to be seeing. Next, let's talk about some of these 5-star characters. Let's start with the free 5-star, the only free 5-star in the game, the main character. The Trailblazer. This is physical type specifically. The main character that you begin with a huge upgrade over something like Genshin. They can actually talk, but only when completely alone and only in their head. So, I don't know, I guess that's like every gacha player or something, but at least it's not Paimon. The starter character, Trailblazer, is actually pretty good overall. They're a physical damage dealer, and they're the only character that has 2 ults. They're either able to do an AoE ult, which is pretty good damage, or a single target ult. Also, if you're male or female, you actually have a different, like, animation before you ult and stuff, which is kind of cool, I guess. And I would say that they're probably one of the best single target physical damage dealers if it wasn't for Sushang, who I believe is just kind of better than them, and I think just overall was doing a lot more damage for me. So I liked using them much more. But overall, nice free character that you start with. Now let's talk about Trailblazer Fire. The main character, but now they're on fire pretty much. Physical Trailblazer is pretty strong, but the fire version I'd say is even better. They go from a DPS to a tank instead, and they constantly shield the team pretty much every time they do anything. They're able to provoke the enemies to attack them. And they also just reduce the damage that they take, and they can reduce the damage that the team takes, especially with one of the light cones that just reduces the damage your entire team takes while the character holds it, which is really good. They also are okay at breaking toughness, I think, especially with the fact that they're able to get like a charge as they use their skill or attack, and then they're able to do a different type of attack that becomes an AoE and also hits twice. So I would say overall they're a very solid character, and I think a lot of people are actually going to be utilizing them in most of their basic teams just because they're very reliable and overall pretty strong. Next, let's talk about Bailu. Well, there's only 2 healers in the game. She's either a 10-year-old doctor or a 500-year-old child. I'm not entirely sure, but she is probably the best healer of the game out of all 2 of them. The only issue is that her skill is a bit RNG because it bounces between allies, and she also doesn't have a cleanse unless you pull multiple copies of her, which is kind of a problem. There's not that many characters that really cleanse in the game, and so, hey, the free 4-star healer actually has that over her in that regard, which I think is kind of cool that they didn't make the 5-star just better in every way. I do feel like this character is kind of like having a bit of a cheat because they do heal so much, and it felt like I was able to just constantly top off my team, which is really powerful. I think this character is actually going to be one of the most useful characters at the start of the game to have. However, I mean, maybe as the game goes on and they add more healers, she'll start to kind of fall off, but that's probably not going to happen for quite a while, I would say. There's only one other healer that we actually know of, and we don't even know when they're going to be released, so I think Bailu is actually a very solid character to get. Oh, now let's talk about Bronya next. I'd consider Bronya to just straight up be the best character in the game, or one of the best at least, maybe tied for best possibly. She's not only able to insanely buff your entire team, but she can also just push an ally to take the next turn, which is incredibly strong because you can just have your character take a turn, then she just makes them take another turn with a damage buff. As an added bonus, she's also a wind element character, and I think a lot of the really annoying enemies that I was fighting in the beta, at least, were weak to wind, and there weren't too many wind characters I would have, unless you're using Dan Heng, which I kind of refused to for most of it, which is relatively rare. And she also has a trace that increases her crit chance to 100%, so just from leveling up Bronya and stuff, you'll be able to get this, so she always crits. So she actually can do a decent amount of damage, especially because her ultimate actually scales off of her own crit damage, giving it to the team. So since you're building that on her anyways, she actually does a decent amount of damage, which is pretty nice. But overall, this character, unbelievably powerful. She's even able to cleanse with her skill that pushes you up, which is so strong. So it kind of just does a little bit of everything for your team, really. Let's talk about Clara. Ilya and Berserker got a new skin. Clara's a very unique character. She counters when hit, making her sometimes pop off, but then sometimes she doesn't really do a whole lot. I think you overall need to make a team comp for this character, so you need to run her with somebody like March 7th, who's able to put the provoke on her, and then every time the enemy hits her, Clara just starts to pop off, which I think is really cool, actually. Overall, she's kind of just a weird character. She's not quite like a lot of the rest of them where you say, oh, this enemy is weak to this, I'll bring this character, because sometimes she just might not really work in the team. However, if you do actually make a team comp around her, she can kind of just go crazy, and especially with her ult, just makes her really hard for the enemy to deal with, I would assume. If you could just keep supporting her with shields to March and healing her, and she'll just solo everything. Although, I'm not really sure how well that would work on like an auto team or something. If you just click auto, I'm not really sure if the AI would actually be able to deal with that, so you can't cheese stuff like that probably. Next is Gepard. He looks kind of like an NPC in fancy armor to me. He's a bit of an odd character. His skill and basic attack are overall not super amazing. His basic attack's whatever, but his skill, it's alright. It has a chance to freeze and it does a little bit of damage, but it never really felt like it was all that incredible to me. But the thing that's really good about him is his ult. His ult just puts a massive shield on your team. And if you run him with a healer, I mean, odds are I just don't really see how you could die, honestly. It just puts you up, like, it just doubles your health bar. Like, you're just so tanky suddenly. So overall, I think he's just really good for difficult content, especially in a place like Simulated Universe, where you could get some of those blessings that do damage based on how much shield you have or other buffs and stuff like that. He can become an absolute monster there and just hard carry while just being a support pretty much. So I think he's a pretty nice character for that. He's not really going to help you speed clear or anything like that in the game though, but just overall really solid, bulky character. Oh boy, Himeko. Let's talk about this character. I like their character design a ton, but I'm not a huge fan of her being all AoE. Himeko is the best AoE fire character in the game, and she's able to shred toughness of enemies in an AoE, which is pretty nice, but her single target is kind of lacking, and she doesn't really have any super special tricks. She has this like extra attack thing that'll happen where like the pizza cutter comes out and like attacks the enemies, but it's really nothing super special, and I just think overall this isn't that powerful, and I think she might be one of the worst 5 stars in the game, actually. You're free to disagree with me, especially, you know, it might be your waifu or something, but I just think overall she's really not that good, and she either needs to do more single target damage or maybe buff the team or have some sort of special trick involved with her other than just being an AoE damage dealer, because realistically, most people are not running into issues where they just don't have enough AoE. So that's kind of my 2 cents on her. Here's some of the limited characters. First, let's talk about Seele. Seele's the first banner character, I believe, that they're going to run even when the game comes out, and I was fortunate enough to pull her and be using her a bunch. She's Quantum, which is rare, so that makes her instantly a little more valuable, I would say. And she has really good area damage because when you kill somebody, she actually just gets an extra turn, which is pretty awesome. So she is pretty decent single target damage, and after she kills, she gets a damage boost, so you can kind of chain kill a couple of units. Although, if you kill an enemy with her skill, and then you kill another enemy with her skill, it won't give an extra turn. It's like you have to kill them with, like, your ult, and it'll give an extra turn. So you can't just chain, like, you can't just kill, like, an infinite amount of enemies back-to-back or something like that. Keep that in mind. It is hard to fully calculate her damage because she actually gets a speed boost, so she's just taking more turns than other characters would, and she's, like, the fastest character in the game. So it can be a little difficult to say, like, exactly what her damage is, but she's definitely putting out a lot. And she also has a pretty neat open world technique, so when you're not in battle, where you just turn invisible and enemies can't see you and can run past them, which is kind of cool. That's a very unique ability that only she has. Alright, let's talk about Jing Yuan. So this is the character that should be second on banner, and he's basically the Zhongli of Honkai Star Rail, where everybody loves this guy and they're like, oh, daddy, you know, all that kind of stuff, right? And he's super cool. Jing Yuan is voiced by the VA of Jotaro from JoJo's in Japanese, and he also has basically a giant lightning stand behind him and some of the best animations in the game, I would say. He should be right after Seele. I believe that they announced on the live stream, announcing the release date of Honkai Star Rail. They even said the banner order of her, then him, I believe. And his AoE and toughness breaking is massive. He completely wrecks their toughness, he does a lot of damage, and it's all in area, which is kind of crazy. For an erudition character, that's very rare. It's basically like, you look at a character like Himeko, and then he just does like 2 to 3 times what she's doing a lot of the time. It seems kind of ridiculous. He's definitely one of the strongest characters in the entire game from what I've seen. I've seen videos of people who got further than I did in the beta and got like crazy gear and all that kind of stuff, and he would just use his attack on a boss and do like 2/3 of its attack in one hit, which is just ridiculous for an AoE character. I don't really know what's going on there, but he pretty much has like a pet where he'll attack and it'll attack, and they're on separate turns, and he'll just completely pop off. So he's probably worthwhile saving for. A lot of people are saying that the Seele banner is actually bait and that you want to skip her and go for him. So hey, if you're interested, he seems to be very good. Next, let's talk about Welt. Welt is one of the base characters of the game. And this NPC old man was apparently a god or something in Honkai Impact. I don't really know how that works, but Welt is the only imaginary damage dealer in the game at launch, and he's useful in almost all content. His element kind of just instantly makes him pretty good, and he's also able to slow enemies, which is really good. Slow or speed up is just really powerful buffs or debuffs to have, and he has a really good mixture of area and single target damage because he's able to hit multiple enemies with his skill and slow and stuff, but if there's only one enemy, then it all focuses on that one enemy and just completely wrecks their toughness. And he's just all around a nice mixture of AoE and single target while just being really good support while being a DPS, which is really nice. Overall, one of the really good characters to have. Let's talk about, is it Yangqing or... Sorry, I probably just butchered that, but let's just call him Yan. Cut and Slice. Oh boy, this guy. I must admit, I'm not the biggest fan of this character design or anything, but this isn't a tier list about design. Let's not talk about that. His skills are crazy. He basically starts off with a max crit and a crit damage boost, which is kind of absurd since the beginning of the game. You're not really going to have that much crit chance. So early game, he's probably one of the best characters to have. He also has a follow-up attack that can freeze enemies, which is really, really good. So he's probably one of the best single target damage dealers upon launch, which is pretty awesome. I've seen him put out some pretty crazy numbers, and the fact that a DPS also has some utility is always really, really good, I think. Next, let's talk about some of the upcoming characters that we have no clue about release date on or anything like that, but we do have some of their skills. I'm going to exclude a character like Blade. I don't really know too much about him. But first, let's talk about Kafka. Kafka is the character I'm most excited for and appears to be the queen of dot damage. She's a Nihility character that pretty much is able to reactivate the dot damage on enemies with her skill, so you can just abuse the amount of dots that they currently have. And I think she's going to kind of enable those teams a lot more in the game. And I think that's important because you want to have a bunch of different types of team comps in the game rather than just like, oh, this character's weak to this, always run this. It's cool to have a lot more variety of those kinds of things. So she could be actually really strong for that. Next is Luocha. Luocha is an offensive healer. He'll be the third healer in the game. He's able to strip buffs off the enemy and also cleanse allies while healing. I believe it's also based off of his damage, so he's like a little bit of a damage dealer. Since there's only 2 healers in the game, he's instantly going to be pretty viable. But I'm not 100% sure how he will be in the end. You actually get to demo him at one point in the story, so you can kind of see what his skills are like for yourself. But his utility seems pretty strong and covers a lot of bases in the game, which I think is really good. Last is Silverwolf. Silverwolf seems completely insane, like one of the best characters in the game. She's able to stack debuffs on the enemy every time she attacks, which weakens them. Like, it weakens their attack, weakens their speed, weakens their defense, all really good things. But she also has the ability to make them gain an extra toughness weakness, so how you break their toughness bar, based on a random character from your team's element. So if you have all quantum characters, let's say you had 4 quantum characters, then that would always make it so that the enemy just becomes weak to quantum, which is insanely powerful because, oh, it also gives a damage boost. It's insanely powerful though, because breaking toughness is such a big deal of the game, especially for bossing and things like that. So it just lets you make a team comp of whatever you want. You could just run her and then 3 characters of the same element, and odds are you're going to make them weak to that and be able to just keep abusing the opponent. Seems insanely strong and really, really broken for when she someday comes out. But keep in mind, these 3 characters, Kafka, Luocha, and Silverwolf, we have no idea when they're going to come out. The beta never really went that far. Things could be way different from the previous closed betas as well. So just keep that in mind. But overall, these are all the characters that I can talk about. And overall, I hope that I did a decent job explaining them. I think overall, the game is pretty well balanced, and I do really enjoy how they did a lot of this. And yeah, I'm really excited for the game too. So I can't wait to play it when it actually releases. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to leave a like or subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you guys next time.